Hello, this is Brian Mead with New Concepts, and today I have a piece of weird and wonderful metalworking equipment that has absolutely nothing to do with saws. Somebody asked me to clean this thing up and get it, up and running. So as long as I was doing that, I figured I would do a quick little video explaining what they are and how they work. This thing is a thing called a Turk's head. It's an adjustable rectangular draw plate. If you look at it, you can see that little rectangular hole there. It really should be centered, but I was kind of winging it last night. But there are 4 blocks of steel in here that are independently adjustable. And you can use them to make whatever rectangular size you need. They're fairly rare, well, they're very rare these days. They were never all that common. They're more European than American. So finding one over here is fairly rare. But since they're so rare, and the number of people who've ever been trained to use them probably, there aren't many left, I expect. So I will go through what I was shown when I was coming up many moons ago. First thing I'm going to do is take the cover off. It's much easier to see what's going on inside here with the cover off. Problem is, you need the cover's actually on that side. So if you take it off, you can see all it is 4 blocks of steel. They're slightly curved on the inside, so that when you run metal through here, it actually gets forced. The important thing and the weird thing about them is that there are 8 screws in 4 pair, and the upper ones control how far it goes this way, and the ones down here are just backup force for the block, which makes it a little tricky to figure out what you're doing. So I was always told that the true Zen masters can adjust them without taking the cover off, but for most people, most of the time, you end up taking the cover off. Just don't drop them. That's actually why they're numbered. And if you notice, I numbered the block just so I know how they go back in, just in case I should drop them. I haven't, but let's just make sure I don't. Anyway, so the way you adjust them is by messing around with these guys. And this particular one is marked 7x7, which makes me think that it's got a 7mm upper size, which sounds about right. But now with these loose, I can adjust them any which way. So the way I was taught to adjust them was by filing up a piece of metal that is the size that you want to draw to. So if you want, say, a 3x6 rectangle, you make yourself a little 3x6 rectangle with a file and use that to set the thing. This is just a piece of tapered copper. I tapered it a minute ago in a rolling mill. That way I can get a good grip on it with the draw plate and pull it through. And I'm going to set it based on this, based on the back half. The advantage to these Turks heads is if you look, this came through a squaring mill, and you can see the edges are slightly octagonal. Turks heads give you honest to God square or rectangle with no funny edges, which, depending on what you're doing, that's an important thing. So I'm just going to set this in here and reset all of these. Like I said, it's sometimes easier if you take the cover off, because at least that way you can see what you're doing. And once I pull the metal out, I will give it just the least little bit of a crank to tighten it a little bit so that it's actually snugged up. Okay, so now I should be able to get this thing out of here, I hope. So now, rather, the ones that are down here are back support. And you see that this went snugged up a little bit on me. So I want to move that just a little. much. And that should still fit through there. Yeah, oh, nope. So we come back a little bit. This is also the reason why it's easier to adjust them with the cover off, because if you need to go wider, if the cover's on, you have to take a dental pick or something and start moving the blocks around. Whereas if the cover is off, you just take your fingers and kind of do this number. All right, let's come back and let's do this again, shall we? Okay, that ought to be about right, I think. Now there's a little line here, so I think this particular forcing screw isn't tight enough yet. Or this one isn't. Because you want to make sure that these guys are in fact square and that there are no little lines there. So now I'm going to ease off on the tension screws just a little. And then tighten it back up again. Again, this is why it's easier to do this with the cover off. And it's also why it's easier to do it when you've got Alright. This could go on for a little bit. I'm going to turn the camera off and just get it set. But you basically get the idea. What I'm going for is to get just a little bit smaller than this. At the moment, my lead-in isn't right, so it's going to take me a few minutes of finagling, and there's no point in you guys watching this. I'll turn the camera back on when I've got it. Alright, so I've got it zeroed out now. What you do is you end up moving the screws in pairs to move the blocks around in there. You want to make sure that you're reasonably centered somewhere in here. This one's a little offside, but that's okay. I've got it set so that my lead-in will go all the way through, but the tail won't, so it's actually going to draw. Then you put the cover back on. And these things are all handmade. This particular one has an X here, and if you look at the back, there's an X there. So that, and my little Sharpie, tells me which way it goes. Then you put everything back together again. Some Jedi Masters can do this with the cover on. I'm not one of them. I have many skills and talents, but these things are so obscure that it is a miracle anybody taught me how to use them at all. I think I've seen 4 of them in my lifetime. They're very cool little things. It's just... Alright. The other thing to know about them is they do have a front and a back. So you want to be drawing into... See, remember how this one's a cup? You want to be drawing starting at this side. So you notice the hole here is a little bit smaller than the hole here. They do actually have a lead in. So I'm going to stick this in here and then stick it on a draw bench, and we'll come back in a second. Okay, here we are. You absolutely need a draw bench to use one of these things. They're usually for such big wire that you can't pull them through by hand. So as we crank on this, you'll see what happens. Kabang! And there we have a nice little piece of rectangular wire with a fairly long lead in, but I can get it all nice and square, or whatever oddball shape I need, just by adjusting the Turks head. So they are a useful little thing. Like I said, they're rare, but they do exist. Here into the lesson, if you were going to adjust this thing, you would then slack off on the pressure blocks and adjust this set in a little bit, but as I say, you move them in pairs. Generally, you set it to your desired final size because horsing around with them is just really fun. But yeah, anyway, just a fun little obscure jeweler's tool that, since I happen to have my hands on it, I figured I'd do a video and show you how they worked. If you have any questions, you can always reach us through the website, www.newconcepts.com. Thank you. Bye.